Initially, they were sourcing for prisoners sentenced to death and then executed, and sourcing the organs after execution. But then they switched to organ extraction as the form of execution. There was a number of things happening simultaneously. One of them was the shift from socialism to capitalism, which meant that the government was withdrawing money from the public sector, including the health sector, and expecting what was once financed by the public sector to raise money through business. And so hospitals began selling organs and while charging for health generally, but certainly charging for organs. And what they found with organs more than anything else was there is an inexhaustible demand globally, and people willing to pay high prices on demand. And what China could offer, which no other country could, is advance appointments, organs on demand, because they just had this supply of prisoners that were sitting waiting to be executed. Another thing that was going on is that they found, as they moved into the business of selling organ transplants to raise money, that prisoners sentenced to death were not ideal as a source, partly because the law said you had to be executed within 7 days of sentence, which meant that you couldn't really schedule that much. I mean, you could ignore the law, but the legal system didn't want to do that. And the other problem was there was a lot of hepatitis B in the prisons. The people involved in criminality were not a necessarily healthy population, and there was drug usage and so on.
葱段，葱段，葱，双手下来。
A third factor was, well, with the repression of Falun Gong, what they ended up happening was this huge population of arbitrarily indefinitely detained people spread throughout China and demonized by the system. Once they decided to repress Falun Gong, you could escape the repression just by recanting, renouncing, denouncing, and many Falun Gong practitioners did. There was an estimated, before the repression, 100 million practitioners in China. So it's like 1/10 the population, huge numbers. And most of them basically just gave up the practice. But there was the high hundreds of thousands, which out of 100 million is maybe not that big, but in the high hundreds of thousands throughout China who refused to renounce, even after torture. And these people were arbitrarily, indefinitely detained throughout China, and they were demonized by the system in order to justify the detention, even though that wasn't the original reason for the detention. And they were healthy because, and Falun Gong is an exercise regime, and so their organs were a lot healthier than the death penalty prisoners. So they became the primary source of organs. And that was in the early 2000s. And so that's basically how it all got started. They're nonviolent and they're not organized. I mean, there is no, and they're not political. So superficially, it's like yoga, except a Chinese version. We've got a exercise. It's to an outsider, it's as bizarre as if the Indians cracked down on yoga. And so superficially, it's kind of surprising. And there was a lot of debate within the system about that. The practice of Falun Gong had not only spread throughout China, but spread throughout the government, spread throughout the party. And but what concerned the party ultimately was the popularity of Falun Gong, because even though, at least initially, before the repression, it was not political, not anti-communist, it was not communist either. I mean, its beliefs were spiritual beliefs. Initially, now it's more underground, but David Kilgore and I wrote a report in 2006 about this. But before we wrote our report, it was all public and obvious that there was individual hospitals had websites with price lists in many languages, and they offered sort of in whatever I mean, the main languages were Korean, Japanese, traditional Chinese, which would cater to Taiwan, Arabic, English. And they offered like a complete global service on demand. Tell us when you want to come, whatever the organ, even a vital organ, you can have it. And they told you on the internet what the price would be, and they'd pick you up at the airport, put you up in a hotel, and and offer you complete service in your language. Despite the gravity of the harm and the systematic nature of the harm and the state institutionalized and organized nature of the harm, there hasn't really been publicity about the atrocity commensurate with the scope of the atrocity. And I mean, there's several reasons for that, but one of them is that nobody can get up and say I've been killed for my organs. I mean, obviously. So it doesn't allow for the same kind of immediacy and you can't actually see it the way you can see a lot of other atrocities. I mean, a lot of other atrocities, you just see the bodies all over the place, and so it's very easy and visible. Or you can talk to somebody who says this has happened to me, and that's also very immediate. But we've never been able to do that with this type of atrocity, because what you're dealing with is a prison, which is a closed environment, a hospital, which is a closed environment, records which are not accessible, witnesses who are all perpetrators. So it's very difficult to get the immediacy, the victimization, and this fellow Cheng provides it, because he can say this happened to me. The advantage of Mr. Cheng, I mean, it's easy for them to dismiss what he says. I mean, they dismiss everything that people say. But what's incontestable is he's had organs removed. I mean, you can see it from the X-rays. And what's also incontestable is he's Falun Gong. I mean, that's pretty hard to. So it's a very simple and visible story.